I hope I didn't scare you with a bunch of these books. I'm not going to read all of them. So, you know, it's mostly people is writing here in America and other foreign countries about me in connection with the politics. But even that I was a member of Russian parliament for 3 years, it was a great lesson for me, great experience. And without this experience, it was impossible for me to write a novel, Don't Die Before Your Death, because I was inside the guts of the politics. And very sadly, I discovered they stink. And but anyway, we could not survive without politics. Many of us were discontent with rudeness, how rude are the police, but we need it, unfortunately. And unfortunately, I think these politics themselves, that's a product of our defects. And we could complain about it and accuse all politicians, and they're very far from ideal, especially now in the all contemporary world. And but we are in a vicious circle because most clever people avoid to be politicians. They complain about it, but it's sometimes it's very easy to be outside and just to be cool and enough sarcastical observer of politics. Anyway, I didn't feel that I'm a politician, even being inside of politics. I just hate indifference to politics. That's it. And I could tell you honestly that I was very shocked, because I remember how active were American writers during war in Vietnam, and that's, they played a great role because they stopped war in Vietnam, American intellectuals, and I was terribly surprised how passive they were during, for instance, such events like bombing in Yugoslavia, and it's really, I was a little bit ashamed that I was only poet who wrote piece in New York Times op-ed page against this bombing. But I didn't criticize only Americans or European leaders. I criticized Russian leaders because they were, all politicians, they were one-sided. So NATO forces on people who connect with them, they were supporting just Albanians. And our government was supporting just Serbs. And I think it's a wrong position. I've seen in my life many ethnic conflicts, and I know there is, in all ethnic conflicts, both sides are guilty, always. You couldn't take sides. And, and I wrote this, piece, and I published it, and I understood how it was uneasy to publish it, because they were editing my article like in the good times of the Soviet censorship. I mean, they were not censoring, of course, they were editing it, but it reminds me a lot from my own experience. And on the TV screen in the United States or in Russia, they were showing absolutely two different wars. Here, where they're showing mostly atrocities, Serbian atrocities, in Russia, Albanian atrocities, etc. It was both points were wrong, and I accuse also our government, because our government who they like, it was a epilepsy of solidarity, I called it, because very epileptically they unexpectedly for everybody they expressed solidarity with Serbian people at the same time when they don't express any kind of solidarity with their own unemployed miners who are knocking with their helmets against asphalt, and they didn't express any kind of solidarity with the retired people who is not getting their official pension, which is so shamefully low in our country. It's about $15. At the same time, when in bar of Moscow gin and tonic cost $12. You know, so that was, in my opinion, a little bit competition, and competition, especially, I could say, in English sides. Because when I heard explanations of Mr. Shia, who was Speaker of NATO, on behalf of NATO, if you remember this gentleman, you know, his Oxfordian intellectual pronunciation contradicted so much with all lies, how he was trying to justify killing of innocent people, some inevitable mistakes, of course inevitable, but inevitability of mistakes doesn't justify mistakes. Because if, for instance, one war, why I'm saying that I was so sensitive to it, because I've seen Second World War, 1941, I was 8 years old, I've seen mountains of corpses. And I was on the duty after my first grade in the school on the roof of our school during German bombings. That's why I could say that I don't like politics, but I don't like politics, but it's a really dirty kitchen, unfortunately. And it doesn't mean because I want to accuse all politicians that they were born dishonest. But sometimes, unfortunately, it's connected with money. And you need a lot of money in Russia. For instance, when I was a member of the parliament in Russia, it was a unique moment in history. We didn't have money, absolutely. And Gorbachev, very naively, I could say even childishly, but that's why I love him, really. He helped to all his rivals. Our TV was obliged to give to all candidates for our parliament free time and TV, the equal rights to promote themselves and so on. And for instance, neither Sakharov nor me or other intellectuals, we were not supported by any money, just by people. So we were elected miraculously, but we learned very quickly from you. And now many of our politicians, they are backed by very dubious money, soft money, you say it. Yes, soft money, yes. So dubious money, foggy money. So, and sometimes not because all of them are so dishonest. They couldn't be elected if they not backed by money. This is the biggest one, most terrible problem of the humanity. So but at the same time, indifference to politics, I think it's a crime. In my opinion, sometimes they cover this. For instance, in Russia, for instance, I could say that our intellectuals also made many mistakes. Because, for instance, we didn't think before we elected new government, we didn't think what people who call themselves Democrats, they could accept bribes, for instance. It was our mistake, terrible mistake. We were primitively divided people for so-called conservatives and so-called progressives or liberals. And we idealized liberals, we idealized ourselves. And now, you know, we did know there is in many countries, but in my opinion, because I've been in 94 countries, and I've seen they call themselves very free countries, but I see they have hidden totalitarian system, dictatorship of only one party, money. And this is true. Because you could, of course, publish to promote some people distributing leaflets on these street corners, but it doesn't work, unfortunately. Your voice never will be heard, or heard by a very small circle of people. And but intellectuals in Russia, in 1993, for instance, they supported Yeltsin when Yeltsin gave order to shell our parliament. If you remember it, it was October 1993, one of the most terrible moments in my life. And why they supported it? Because they were under the pressure of the idea of the lesser evil. They think, okay, yes, they already discovered many corruption inside so-called democratic movement of people of the yesterday's rebels who were fighting against privilege and who began to grab such a privilege that Brezhnev didn't see in his best dreams, you know. And surrounding themselves with a cronies, lackeys, etc. But they thought that inside parliament there are some hardliners and they are very dangerous people, and so it's better. So it's American theory. They are crooks, but they are crooks. So you see, so it's a lesser evil. And what they got after the bombing, the shelling of our parliament is a connect with Chechnya, because according to Dostoevsky, used one Russian neologism, вседозволенность. Вседозволенность, if probably it will be very awkward expression in English, it's omnipermissiveness, when everything is permitted. So they when they cross this border between evil and good, and they began to shell their parliament, it was easier for them to begin war in Chechnya. War in Chechnya, if you do not ask me about this war, it's a pain here, because we could have stopped many years ago. But beginning of war in Chechnya, it was a bit in the moment when we began to shell our parliament. So, but in the same time, in Russia, what happens sometimes between American intellectuals when I speak to them, why you don't protest against it or against it? Why you intellectuals? I was talking with some very famous film directors. You call yourself liberals, but liberal, in my opinion, is not insulting word. It's not pathetic word. It's a good word. I still respect, despite of the corrosion of this term. And I am liberal. I am incorrigible liberal too. But because it's a region of this word, it's liberty, and I love this word. So they give me the same explanation with how Russian people explain. Lesser evil. Because they think, okay, they support Democrats, okay, but they don't criticize Democrats because they said, but Republicans, they are, you know, they're our hardliners. You have to understand it, and so we are. And so they keep silent. And they make Democrats worse, you know. They could help. You could find way to say truth, but not insulting and not destroying democratic move, but to say truth to your own friends, even your so-called comrades in arms. Otherwise, you'll spoil your comrades in arms with your silence, with your permanent support, despite of what they're doing. And even word democracy or liberalism will be discredited in so many eyes. That's what happens in Russia now. It's not, when you see some old people waving red flags on the streets of Russia, it doesn't mean what all of them are Stalinists. And they're longing for any kind of ideals. And they were, who saved our very fragile, very stupid, very undemocratic democracy at the very beginning, during this hardliners putsch? People. I've been there. I've seen thousands of people there. I've seen so many women came with the strollers, with their babies. They surrounded with a live ring. It was, you know, I never seen the most beautiful moment in my life after the day of victory in Red Square. So many good, wonderful people, and their hopes were deceived. Because main mistake was that inside the parliament at that time, when they began to shell it, were not only hardliners too, but they were secretaries. Some of secretaries, because of lack of babysitters or nannies, they brought their children, and so on. Some people, waitresses, secretaries, typists, some plumbers, workers who are not connected with politics. They also were there. And when they passed this border, it was easier for them to begin war in Chechnya, to find, above all, traditionally longing for enemy. And this doesn't mean what I idealize Chechen terrorists. They are terrible and very dangerous. They are very cruel and shameless, and shamelessly cruel in what they are making. So, but lesser evil, I never could accept this theory of the lesser evil. I have to keep silent. For instance, I went during very bad times for our Russian religion, when custom people was confiscating Bibles on the borders, when some foreign missionaries, they were carrying it. When it was permitted, special for a very tiny church publishing house to print some certain copies of Bible, I wrote an article. It sounds even humoristically, defending Bible, you know, but it was, you know, I was attacked from many sides. But now our church embraces too much with the official politicians, and I criticize this church because they are bargaining too much. They look as the politicians. I mean, putting today very current profits above the great common task. The common task is the same. It's the brotherhood of all men. That I do believe in it. I work for it. So that's why I do not call me as a politician. I'm poetician. But I could not accept any kind of explanations of any intellectuals when they avoid just to talk, to speak about politics. And politics, if politicians don't feel that they are under the control of most famous, most known and respectable intellectuals in their countries, they feel just, you know, like masters. They don't afraid of anything. And I think it's this is that's even in Russia now it happens, because in Russia now some people, very interesting, that some intellectuals who very well, generally very well, survived very difficult period of this hard censorship of the when KGB was really watching all intellectuals, sometimes putting them into mental hospitals or pushing them away. We, despite of this condition, surprisingly, we had a great literature. And sometimes we were publishing it. It's not only samizdat, I mean self-publishing houses. In the Soviet times, that's a wrong theory of some Sovietologists, what it was not really great art in the Soviet Union since 1970. No, it's not true. We had many gifted, very gifted writers. Some of them were killed, some of them were arrested, but some of them survived. I could just give you as an example, last conversation of Nabokov with our great poet, Bella. She's a woman, but I don't call woman who writes poetry poetess. I don't like her. I could call wives of the poets poetesses, but woman who writes good poetry is a poet. Woman poet. And Nabokov was trying to avoid any contacts with Russian writers, but when he was already dying, he received Bella in his wheelchair. And absolutely, he always sarcastically made only sarcastical comments about the Soviet Russia. Even he was attacking Pasternak. Even he very sarcastically commented Dr. Zhivago, which is, in my opinion, very important note in our century. But he said to her, absolutely unexpectedly, you know, sometimes I feel pity that I was not in Russia in 1917, the beginning of October Revolution, and I was not living in Russia all these years. She exclaimed very naturally, but you could be arrested, you could be in Gulag, they could kill her. Yeah, he said, I could be arrested, I could be in Gulag, but not necessarily could be die there, I could survive. And probably I could be completely different writer and probably much better at what he said near his death. Very interesting moment. So Russian history of Russian literature is full of tragedies. That's true. But in the same time, were so many great poetry, even in difficult times, before our generation. Our generation, I began to publish my first poems in 1949, being 15 years old. My first book I published being 19, 1952. It was all Stalin was alive. It was a terrible time. There was a trial of so-called doctor poisoners. But we developed very quickly after Stalin's death. But even that time, you could find in some poems the seeds of the future. For example, we were already longing for a world which was being behind Iron Curtain, not learning foreign language because we didn't hope that will come one day when we'll use it. That's why my English is so terrible. So, but we were hoping, we were working for this day. And very interesting is that today we have no political censorship, but we have commercial censorship. And commercial censorship, as you perfectly, we joined your club, but as you perfectly know, commercial censorship, objectively, it transformed itself into political censorship, hidden one, soft one. And that's, and some Russian intellectuals, they lost themselves. Why? Because our version of socialism was known for us animal. We know how to avoid, how to deceive him, how to make the. So we knew very well this animal. And our capitalism, it's absolutely unknown animal. And very wild, believe me. Very wild. And they a little bit instinctively, they scare. And even very strange, as a people, so people, they don't know how to behave with this animal. What kind of position? Because capitalism immediately created some prizes in Russia, literary prizes. But what kind of struggle around this prize? Of course, there is fight, like around Nobel Prize, like probably only your Pulitzer's Prize, nobody would suspect in the struggle behind curtain. But I'm sure there is something. And they are terribly cautiously choose words speaking about politics now. Yes, they are trying to avoid politics. They're saying people who was fighting and involved very courageously into current politics, into fight for the conscience of Russia, salvation of conscience of Russia, they try to avoid. They're saying, no, we are writers. We are not interested in politics. And so, and what's the result? Paradoxically, now when we have no official censorship, We still have some good writers, of course. But I could tell you that last 10 years are not best years of Russian literature at all. A little bit, I'd say, for instance, swearing was forbidden in Russia. Yeah. And sometimes, you know, I was a worker. I was in geologist expedition. I almost don't swear, almost. Because when I came back from geologist expedition, being 15 years old, when I first time made the money for my own first typewriter, my mom met me at the train station. We were going in the tram, and I was very enthusiastically telling her my stories about my Siberia adventures, because I was under my command in the geologist expedition were about 15 criminals. And she was listening to me with widely open eyes, and all passengers too, and she began to cry. I said, what happened? No, Mom. Zhenya, you don't notice that after each word you use, I could say, not literary expressions. So that's why it was a good lesson for me. In any way, I am not hypocrite, and I know that sometimes, you know, there is no best way to use swearings, but you have no words, other words, you know, to express your feelings. But Russian literature is childishly overstuffed with swearings now. You know, absolutely unnecessary one. Russian cinema absolutely unnecessarily overstuffed with naked pieces which absolutely not connected with plot. It's, you know, it's very childish. It's even sometimes it's boring because it became academy. And probably it's inevitable process. So we are in transitional process now, and I think that Russia will recover. You know, I think that pessimism, generally, it is the easiest way to look cleverer than the others. Of course, optimism, full of stupid optimism, is also very dangerous. And but I do believe in my country. Russia will recover. Probably don't bet too much on the on the next elections in Russia. Happily, it will be, we have no very big choice in Russia. And I don't think anywhere there is such a choice, a big choice in politics, you know. But I think Russia will recover when young generation who was not yet born in the cage, and when they will forget all political struggles amongst old rivals, they will forge some new politicians. And when I talk to Russian teenagers, Russian students now in Russia, because I spent half of my time in Russia, not only in Russia, in the all republics of the former Soviet Union, I couldn't feel that they are not foreign for me. They are full of my friends. And we were sharing common fight against censorship for freedom, and they are like brothers for me. Just this year I was in Ukraine, I was in Georgia, I was in Kazakhstan, and we were told we have same problem, corruption and transformation of democracy in very strange system of I even couldn't find a name for it. But I do believe in that Russia will recover. So, and I feel it. But we have It was a big social cataclysm, big. It was too short time, 10, 12 years, Russia will recover, in my opinion. But now I'm not talking more about politics today. Good? So, and I would like just to tell you something about my teachers in poetry. And I brought my anthology here. Is someone, I just would like to give you some examples of the people who was teaching me. Because a poet couldn't be born in the empty place. I inherited so much, you know, from Russian tradition. For instance, there was one poet. His name is, first name Yaroslav, last name Smelikov. He was a very close friend of mine. I was brought up with his poetry. He published his first book being very young in 1930. Smelikov. Who recites from you very well poetry? Don't be modest, please. You. Thank you, sir. So, you are accepted in the society of modest people, most modest people in the world. Or probably you'll replace me as president. So I would like to read for you one. Smelikov was about 15 years in prison, but not once, many times in his life. He was broken man, but at the same time great poet. And why I still, a little bit pessimistic optimist, because I learned a lot in my life from the people who spent many years in concentration camps. When they came back, they were teaching us this pessimistic optimism, I could say. So I would like, if we'll read together with you, sir, his poem, if you don't mind. We will recite one poem. I will give you a book, you will read in English, I remember by heart. Yaroslav Smelikov, born 1912, died 1972. And this poem was written when he was in concentration camp. And that's a great example. Yes.
Line by line?
Yeah. No. You read.
Okay.
Full poem.
You all do. Should I ever fall ill, I don't turn to doctors. It's to friends I turn. Don't think I'm delirious. Make my bed from the steps, curtain the windows with mist, set at my head the night stars.
Go on. Short poem.
I always pressed forward. I had no reputation for shirking. Should I ever be wounded fighting for justice, then bandage my head with a mountain path and cover me up with a blanket of autumn flowers. I want nothing of powders or drops. Let the sun's rays shine in the glass, the hot desert wind, the silver cascade of a stream. That's something worth being cured by. Mountains and seas waft winds of eternity. When you see them, you feel. We live eternally. Not with white pills or capsulettes, my path is strewn, but with clouds. And I depart from you, not down hospital corridors, but down the Milky Way.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Если я заболею, к врачам обращаться не стану. Обращаюсь к друзьям, не сочтите, что это в бреду. Постелите мне степь, занавесьте мне окна туманом в изголовье поставьте ночную звезду. Я ходил напролом, я не слыл недотрогой. Если ранят меня в справедливых боях, забинтуйте мне голову горной дорогой и укройте меня одеялом в осенних цветах. От равнины, от гор так и веет веками. Как почувствуешь, сразу поймешь, что мы вечно живем. Не обладками белыми путь нас усыпан, а облаками. Не больничным уйду коридором, а млечным путем.
Amen.
So, another my teacher. I need you.
Again?
Thank you very much anyway. So, you know what happens now in Russia? We have very very well organized postmodernist movement. I mean, some of their ideologists, they trying to discredit all poets who were in this way or another way discredited, were connected with the revolution. They don't understand what these people before revolution, seeing corruptions of Tsar court, they could not understand that revolution will lead to new corruption. Of course, sometimes it's impossible to predict. And so, for example, one of them published one article, funeral of the Soviet literature, trying to trample Gorky, who was a great writer, absolutely great man. Yes, he didn't save everybody, but he saved many people during Civil War, asking Lenin personally, and he was killed by Stalin. We have now direct evidence about it. And he was accused by some critics of this generation being lucky of Soviet regime, etc. Everything was much more complicated. Our greatest poet of revolution was Vladimir Mayakovsky. He was one of the best poets of the, not only political poet. In a way, he was weaker as a political poet. But he was but he believed in revolution. He predicted revolution. And he was also, in a way, indirectly, but psychologically killed by revolution because he committed suicide in 1930. But he was also a great poet of unrequited love. And when he was at 22 years old, he wrote one of the beautiful poem on the level of Dante, of Petrarca, poem The Cloud and Trousers. And we will read now we'll just stop with some, we'll read it with some stops. And this is an unbelievably strong poetry. And you could not talk. More or less, many writers, they could be, if they're not indifferent, if they're involved in politics, they could make some mistakes. But that doesn't matter, they're human beings. And their poetry, great poetry always survives. 239, okay? 239. And this is also my teacher. Yeah, that's just fragment. The Cloud and Trousers. So you read, you stop. Yeah, you stop here. Even you see gaps, little gaps. One moment I'll take. I remembered, but I'm afraid to make.
To start
Yes, to start here.
Just start right
Here,
there and
here, stop here, and I will read this stanza, etc., etc.
Okay.
We will make probably.
You do stanza? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, sometimes.
Okay.
Sometimes you, but we will make mistakes, of course. It's inevitable.
Yeah, that's
but
okay.
we'll try. We'll try. Probably not.
All right.
You are witnesses. We didn't have rehearsal. So it was written 1914.
This is from Cloud and Trousers.
You see.
You think this is some malarial dream? It happened. Happened in Odessa. I'll come at 4, Maria said. 8, 9, 10.
Вы думаете, это бредит малярия? Нет, это было в Одессе. Приду в 4, сказала Мария. 8, 9, 10.
And now the sad December evening turned away from the windows into the horror of night. Candelabras tinkle with laughter, giggling behind my wretched back.
Вот и вечер. В ночную жуть ушел от окон хмурый, декабрый, в дряхлую спину хохочут, ржут канделябры.
You couldn't recognize me now as sinewy mass, moaning, writhing. What can an unformed mass like this really want? There's a lot that it wants.
Меня вы сейчас узнать не могли бы. Жилистая громадина стонет, корчится. Что может хотеться этакой глыбе? А глыбе многое хочется.
After all, for the self, what's bronze is not important, nor is the fact that the hearts become like frozen iron. At night, you want to hide the clanging echo that it makes in something soft and womanly.
Ведь для себя не важно и то, что бронзовый, и то, что сердце холодной железкой. Ночью хочется звон свой спрятать в мягкое, в женское. I don't teach her. Go.
And now, enormous, I hunch by the window. I melt the window glass with my brow. Will love come or won't it? And what kind? A great passion or some lay-by night?
И вот громадный, горблюсь в окне, плавлю лбом стекло окошечное. Будет любовь или нет? Какая? Большая или крошечная?
A body like this, how can it have a great romance? Rather some petty, peaceful, little passing affairs. The kind that shies at auto horns and loves the jingle of pony bells.
Откуда большая у тела такого? Должно быть крохотный, смирный лебеночек. Оно шарахается автомобильных гудков, любит звоночки коночек.
Again and again, burying my face with the rain in its small park's scarred face, I wait, spattered by the thunder of the city's loud surf.
Еще, уткнувшись дождю, лицом в его лицо рябое, жду, обрызганный громом городского прибоя.
Midnight leapt out with a knife, caught up with me, and stabbed, chuck him out.
Go on.
The 12th hour of night fell like a condemned head from the flock.
Полночь, с ножом мечась, догнала, зарезала, вон его! Упал 12-й час, как с плахи голова казненного.
In the window glass, gray raindrops howled, burst into an enormous grimace, as if they were gargoyles howling on the facade of Notre Dame.
В стеклах дождинки серые свылись, громаду громадили, как будто воют химеры собора Парижской Богоматери.
A curse on you. Haven't you had your pound of flesh? Soon my mouth will be torn apart in a scream. I listen, quietly. A nerve has sprung, as if from a patient in his cot. And now, little by little, at first, and then more strongly, the nerve begins to beat, anxiously and evenly, but ever faster, until the first nerve and another two flap up and down in frantic dance.
Проклятая! Что же, и этого не хватит. Скоро криком издерется рот. Слышу, тихо, как больной с кровати спрыгнул нерв. И вот сначала прошелся, едва, потом забегал взволнованный, четкий. Теперь и он, и новые два мечутся отчаянной чечеткой.
The plaster on the lower story collapses from the dance. Nerves, important ones, minor ones. So many of them jerk out feverishly, and their feet give way beneath them.
Нервы. Рухнула штукатурка. В нижнем этаже нервы! Большие, маленькие, многие скачут отчаянно, и уже у нервов подкашиваются ноги.
And night clogs like silt in the room. My heavy eye cannot get out of the silt. Of a sudden, the doors begin to rattle, as if the hotel's teeth were beginning to chatter.
А ночь по комнате тянется и тянется. И стены не вытянутся отяжелевшему глазу. Двери будто заляскали, будто у гостиницы не попадает зуб на зуб.
All of a sudden, you entered, as sharply as, "Here you are," torturing the chamois of your glove, saying, "You know, I'm going to get married."
Вошла ты, резкая, как нате, муча перчатки зам, сказал, знаете, я выхожу замуж.
All right then, get married. See if I care. I'll get by. See how calm I am, like the pulse on a corpse.
Что ж, выходите. Ничего, покреплюсь. Видите, спокоен как пульс у покойника.
Do you remember? You said, Jack London, money, love, and passion. But all I could see was that you were Mona Lisa, who had to be stolen.
Помните, вы говорили, Джек Лондон, деньги, любовь, страсть, а я одно видел, вы, Мона Лиза, которую надо украсть.
And stolen you were.
И украли.
Once more in love, I'll begin the game again, throwing the light of fires on the curve of my brow. So what?
Go on.
But homeless squatters sometimes dwell in shells of gutted houses. Are you having me on? With less small change than a beggar has, you own the wealth of emeralds. Remember, Pompeii perished when Vesuvius was teased beyond bearing.
Дразните! Меньше, чем у нищего копеек у вас изумрудов безумий. Помните, погибла Помпея, когда раздразнили Везувий.
Hey, gentlemen! Lovers of blasphemy, crimes, and cattle slaughter. The hardest thing to bear you've ever seen was in my face, when I'm absolutely calm.
Эй, господа, любители святотатств, преступлений, боен. А самое страшное, видели лицо мое, когда я абсолютно спокоен?
I feel my ego is not enough for me. Someone's obstinately trying to get out of me. Hello? Who's that? Mother? Mother! Your son is wonderfully sick, Mother? He's suffering from fire in the heart. Tell my sisters, Lyudmila, Olga, there's nowhere left for him to go. Each word and joke he expels from his volcanic throat is ejected like a naked prostitute from a burning cat house.
Кто-то, и я чувствую, для меня мало, кто-то из меня вырывается упрямо. Алло, кто говорит? Мама, мама, ваш сын прекрасно болен. Мама, у него пожар сердца. Скажите сестрам, Люде и Оле, что ему уже некуда деться. Каждое слово, даже шутка, которая изрыгает обгорающим ртом, он выбрасывается, как голая проститутка из горящего публичного дома.
People can smell grilling flesh. Here they come, shining in helmets, no time for boots. Tell the fire brigade, with tenderness they try to cool my burning heart. I can cool it off myself. I'll pump out tears by the barrel. Who cares if it presses on my ribs? It wants to jump, jump out, jump out. It won't work. My ribs have collapsed.
Люди нюхают, запахло жареным, нагнали каких-то блестящие в касках. Мама, не надо, скажите пожарным, на сердце горящие лезут в ласках. Я сам! Глаза наслезненные бочками выкачу. Дайте о ребра опереться. Выскочу, выскочу, выскочу. Рухнули. Не выскочишь из сердца. Thank you, браво. Браво. You are a great reader. Great reader. You almost didn't make mistakes. So, you see, I just showed you my background a little bit. It's just tip of the iceberg. But they were teaching me poetry. They were teaching me belief in my country. They teach me conscience. And they're great poets. They made some mistakes, political mistakes. And I was trying not to repeat their mistakes. And so I have ideals, but I don't idealize my ideals. You know, I have to, because they are mine. I already love them. They are my friends. I always speaking them, asking them advice sometimes. But in some situations, I have to ask myself. Pushkin or other fathers of the Russian poetry, of the Russian conscience. This way I live, and if there is no one, when our president couldn't give me any kind of advice, I have other, more important presidents of my heart, Russian poets. So I'm ready to be tortured by your questions. Tonight I will recite my own poet.
How long was Mayakovsky your teacher?
Since
Did you study directly under him?
no. He committed suicide 1930. So I was born 1933.
So your study is through the poems themselves.
Yes. My father was geologist, and he was. But he was writing poetry, and he knew a lot of poems by heart. While my mom was reading me poetry for children, he was reciting me poetry, other poetry. So I learned a lot from him. I'm ready. Please.
I have a number of questions and thoughts prompted by your talk, but one of them had to do with the breaking down of barriers. When the liberal impulse in this country too has been against restriction and against things that limit us. And then, as happened suddenly in the Soviet Union and gradually here, there are no limits. And that wonderful word you used, the situation where all is permitted. Then what does the poet write about when all the barriers are down? What happens to the writing?
Yeah, because a writer, writer always has to combine, in my opinion. Because what I'm saying, it's each poet creates regulation for himself, So what I'm saying, it's my own regulation, my rules, moral rules and professional rules. First of all, I began my work in arts 1941 because my mom, after Moscow was surrounded, I was born in Siberian Junction, Zima Junction. It's a little town, half village, half town, 15,000 people. and she had that time, and she was a singer, not famous singer. She was going to the front, performing for soldiers, sometimes in trenches or on the tracks, on the platforms of the tracks. And she lost her voice during Second World War because sometimes she was singing in the blizzard. But she has sent me by train to evacuation to my granny's, to Zima Junction. And I created one film. I was first in my movie, Kindergarten, because kindergarten of my childhood, my generation, was the Second World War. So now you could get there by train 4 days and a half. And I was in my journey. It's incredible, like Oliver Twist's journey, during 5 months. 5 months. And when all money were finished, I began to sing on the platforms, stage for a piece of bread, for some rubles, or something. And I, since that time, I probably, even being in Zima Junction, I was dancing in the very strange weddings, sometimes collective weddings, when some young, it was a draft, when it was a draft time, draft call, so they made collective weddings sometimes in the schools. And the next day, they were going to front in the trains, sometimes for cattle. And, or even together with cattle, sometimes. I've seen it, I remember it. And we still have in Siberia some widows, whose widows' version, because sometimes they didn't have even time for a first night, for wedding night. It happened sometimes. And I was dancing for them also. So performing on the stations, on the Siberian road, and dancing for such weddings, it was my first experience in art. And I could not imagine myself just writing for myself only. I always see, and I'm trying to be understood by any kind of crowd. What I want, it's very difficult. I want to be understood by each last vino who is snoring on the bench in the Central Park or in the on the street of Moscow or Siberia, and to wake him up to recite his poetry, and he will understand it and probably will cry. And at the same time, not to be banal or primitive for highest intellectual. So it's a very difficult task to be accessible at the same time, not to be primitive and banal. So I couldn't say what I was always successful in it. But in some cases, yes. In some cases, yes. Sometimes probably my poetry is too explicative, too many explanations, you know. Probably, because you feel masses. I have feeling of mass, of big crowd. For instance, that evening when I was recited poetry from the balcony of our White House, 200,000 people. It was not good poem. I wrote this poem, it was improvisation. I wrote this line in camp for microphone. But I wrote, when I wrote in my novel, Don't Die Before Your Death, I quoted this poem. I said, my best bad poem. Because it was a part, this poem even was more than poem. It was a part of the history now. And so, of course, it was written in hurry. And some of my poems were written in hurry because I want to write sometimes very quickly, immediately. And I published my first poem in newspapers. And I liked in newspaper. And I like to be published in newspaper. But when Harrison Salisbury was a vice editor-in-chief of New York Times, he published about 15 my different poems in different times. Babi Yar was published in New York Times. Heirs of Stalin was published in New York Times. Many times ago, Al Gore later brought from Russia fatal measures about when I was foreseeing, unfortunately, fall of Gorbachev, because he was when he began to make mistakes. I admire him, that's really true. But I was predicting fatal half measures. It was published. I published a poem written on the assassination of Robert Kennedy. It was published the same day, in the same day in Moscow and New York and many countries, and I like it. But sometimes when you're so flexible, when you are very sensitive to political events in all countries, you are inevitably in a hurry. And some poems didn't survive. So I respect them, I love them, they're part of my life, part of the history. But they were dying like soldiers in attack, you know, unknown soldiers. So, but some of them survived, like Babi Yar, like Heirs of Stalin, even being published for first time in newspapers. And some poems which I was writing political poems which were waiting very long time for to be published. Like, for instance, my poem, Tanks Are Going Through Prague. I wrote it immediately when it was invasion in Russia. And, but it was widely distributed by hands in leaflets over all Russia. Like my poem in America was distributed many years ago when Alison Krauss, student of Kent University, was killed. It was immediately translated by Lori Ferlinghetti by his City Lights bookstore, and it was distributed, how he said me, about 200,000 copies in the United States. And, but I'm also, I'm poet of two things, love and shame. That's my main inspiration, love and shame. Even I couldn't say as a poetry of protest, but Babi Yar is a poet inspired by my shame. When I came to Babi Yar and hadn't seen even one little sign symbolizing this mass assassination of 70,000 Jews, among them were some Ukrainians and Russians who was trying to save them. And I was so ashamed that I immediately wrote a poem, overnight. It was surprisingly quickly published. And editor-in-chief, who was a member of party, he was a veteran of war, a wonderful man, he knew what he will fire immediately. And he was keeping place, empty place in newspaper, waiting when censor will come. Whom? He said, yes, we'll just publish some information here. Not important. And he did it. Because in that time, even you couldn't publish even postcard, even an invitation for your own birthday without censorship stamp. So they were, Xeroxes were forbidden in Russia. Xerox for private use. And so, and he called his wife. And his wife was a nurse. Nurse during Second World War. She saved, according some legends, about 300 soldiers, sometimes carrying them on the battlefield, and was giant, wrestler's size Russian woman. And I was waiting in the corridor of their decision. He called his wife, and they came back, and she said to me, with wet eyes, "Zhenya is my short name. We decided to be fired," she said to me. So, and I got a great support of the people. I was covered with mud for this poem, like for Heirs of Stalin. Heirs of Stalin was published just by Khrushchev. His secretary was keeping 3 months this poem in his pocket, knowing that Khrushchev was a very emotional man. And he was choosing a moment. Because problem of Khrushchev was Khrushchev was a Stalin. He was a Stalinist too a little bit. You know, he was involved in all this time, and made jump over abyss and tulips, and it was great definition. And Khrushchev, someone of he was in Caucasus, in the village surrounding, saying them stories about Stalin's atrocity. And Khrushchev said, that's pity that we stopped to write about this Stalin's crime now. It's wrong, he said. In this moment, and he was crying. His secretary gave him. It was just two days before a Cuban missiles crisis. 2 days. And he has sent it by military plane to Moscow, to Pravda. And my poem, which was already, because I recited it openly, and it was, they forbid all my poetry readings, saying what I am making schism in the country, I'm calling for civil war. I want to divide all country. They call me anti-Soviet, anti-patriot, etc. And it was published in Pravda with a newspaper, with circulation, 25 million. And some party bureaucrats, they didn't know that Khrushchev was behind it. And they wrote to Khrushchev letter accusing editor-in-chief of Pravda in the anti-patriotic activities. And in this moment, Khrushchev said, it was a special Politburo meeting, and he said to Secretary of our ideology, Ilyichov, terrible rascal, he said to him that he has to prepare the special degree resolution of Central Committee about the abolishment of the censorship. He said, it's anachronism.
Wasn't his son-in-law the editor of his
Известия.
Известия?
Yeah. So, but afterwards it was a Caribbean missile crisis, tension, and everything was. So, but it was published. Pravda, communist paper. You know, that was absolutely, everybody were overwhelmed. And so that's, but, you know, in this poem survived. I could say, unfortunately, survived, like a Babi Yar, because I'm dreaming that will come times when my grandsons will come to me and they'll ask, Grandpa, what is anti-Semitism? But unfortunately, I'm working for this day. But it doesn't look, it's very near. And unfortunately, and so about the Stalinism in Russia. So I could say, unfortunately, these poems still survive. Yes, and but so that's two Yevtushenko's main inspiration: love and shame. Please, after you. Ladies first. Yeah, it's a love poem.
Yes, it is a love poem. How it has been experienced and has been said that a lot of Eastern Europeans, or most of us Eastern Europeans, have suffered a sense of internal exile. Therefore, we're not able to fully enjoy life for what it is because of the daily troubles, the daily political ideas that we couldn't express fully were that the bread lines and all these other things. I know my father spent 12 years in prison for anti-communist protests.
Are you from Poland or what?
Romania.
Romania. Uh-huh.
Do you feel now that you have missed, that you have somehow skipped over that sense of internal exile, that you have lived your life to the fullest, that you were...
No. First of all, I could tell you that I never was, myself, I never was anti-communist in my life, first of all, never. So it does mean I respect dissidents who were fighting against communism. You know why? I could explain you why. When being a child, I read once one Lenin's quotation, which I liked very much. So that the future, communist future, it will be borderless, with no borders, with no governments, and we will build public restrooms from the gold. I loved it, really, I loved it as idea. No borders, no visas, no governments, no bureaucracy. And sometimes when my American friends, they ask me, Mr. Yevtushenko, what do you think? The communism will return to Russia? I'm just smiling, because I never seen communism in Russia. I think it was a different society under the pseudonym of communism or socialism. They didn't call our society communist society, they called it socialism. But something, in spite of dictatorship, some features of socialism, that's true, despite of all atrocities. For instance, really it was a brotherhood between between many cultures of multinational Soviet Union. And for me, it was a terrible shock when Soviet Union was destroyed. Because in my opinion, probably it couldn't survive, historically. But probably. But if it could collapse itself peacefully, it could be different situation now in our area. But I think the people who, Yeltsin and Ukrainian President Kravchuk and Belarusian President, when they gathered in the dark forest of Belovezhskaya Pushcha, they took decision just to pull their members from their parliament, which means Soviet Union since they exist. They didn't ask opinion of their peoples. Above all, they didn't ask majority. And Gorbachev also made many mistakes. Yes, that's true. His mistake was, and he was a good man. He was trying to transform. He was too late. Being student, he was a very good friend of one of Czechoslovakian future dissidents, Mlynarz, his name was, Zdeněk. I remember Zdeněk, probably Mlynarz, last name. And he began what he was trying to do. He was trying to realize ideas of socialism with human face, ideas of Prague Spring 20 years later. But he began to make mistake, because he was also like from one part of his heart hated bureaucracy and even party. But he was a party apparatchik at the same time. It was ambivalence, like in Khrushchev, but he was, in a way, he was a child of Khrushchev. And Yeltsin, we had a giant democratic movement, memorial anti-Stalinist organization, which was organized by Sakharov and me and Afanasyev and Adamovich. It was giant organization without membership, which is what's great additional power. When we began to make first rallies, when we surrounded KGB building with the candles, it was really impressive. And Gorbachev, no one from us was hateful to Gorbachev. We invited him. And Sakharov, despite what they had sometimes discussions in the parliament, he respected him. It's really true. And we invited him 3 or 4 times for our rallies. But some other people was giving him stupid information about us. Even for instance, when we have 300,000 rallies near Red Square, he got information. Now, afterwards, we discovered that we are going to attack Kremlin with iron hooks, climbing like in medieval times. It was just absolutely delirium. And in my opinion, he his mistakes was what he didn't write democratical movement. He was scared. And he began, Shevardnadze warned him openly about this conspiracy. against democracy. And he had wonderful chance to say, Shevardnadze, that I am resigning, but I'm warning you that there is conspiracy. You could be victim. A democracy could be victim of this conspiracy. If Gorbachev could give hint to Shevardnadze, say, please stay with me. We began perestroika, we have to continue it shoulder to shoulder, but he didn't say it, these words. So his undecisiveness, he became very undecisive, very ambivalent, not sure in himself. He was not man of bad will. Some people accusing him in the collapse of the Soviet Union, they are saying that he even was agent of so-called reactionary force of the West. That's, of course, it's stupidity. But Yeltsin had, unfortunately, petty vindictiveness against Gorbachev. Yeltsin didn't understand what they were doing when they decided this collapse. So he came back after this agreement. He wanted to get rid of Gorbachev. That's only was his touch. He didn't understand what could happen. He didn't think about forthcoming consequences. What we have now, we have destroyed relationship between so many republics. We have some civil wars, sometimes ethnic wars, even clans wars inside, in outskirts of the former Soviet Union. So many. We didn't give chance to the Soviet Union of survival. Probably it was hopeless. But if it couldn't be, we again avoided evolution. We again made a revolution. We again accelerated history. Again, like in 1917. And we began as in 1917. So it was a very it was anti-Bolshevik, very Bolshevistic revolution. You understand? So we behaved in intolerance to the past. We immediately began to change everything. Why everything? We didn't save best things what we had in the Soviet Union. So this is a big problem. And I mean, what is now main problem of the Russia? It is ideological vacuum. We don't need ideology, because ideology it's forced ideals. But we need ideals themselves, and that's and I think what it could save us is the Sakharov's testament, because Sakharov said his testament was his dream about the third system, which will save the best features of the idea of socialism, best flexible sides of contemporary capitalism, minus atrocities of our version of socialism, minus mistakes and atrocities of contemporary capitalism. Third system. And I think there's a big perspective not only for Russia but for the world. That's my opinion, like this. And again, I know that this society, third system, never will be perfect, because we, human beings, we never will be perfect. But that's evolution. So thank you. Yeah. So I think it's too late. I invite you for my poetry reading, and I'm sorry for thousands of my mistakes, my little speech. Thank you.
No mistakes. Thank you.